The ground was soaked with rain. A shallow ditch turned into a river of mud where no living thing should have been. She lay there, ribs like broken fingers pressing through her skin, her fur clumped and slick with filth. Around her, the faint whimpers of newborns cracked the silence, small cries swallowed by the storm. The puppies clung blindly to her belly, their mouths searching for milk she did not have. She had stopped moving hours ago, maybe longer, her eyes half closed, a glaze settling over them like frost on glass. The ditch stank of decay, of forgotten places. No one was meant to pass by, no one was meant to notice. Yet somehow, in the thick of the storm, headlights cut through the trees. The sound of brakes, doors slamming, boots crunching over gravel, voices rising with disbelief, then urgency. In that instant, the line between death and life trembled. The mother, near gone, and the pups, doomed to follow, had one chance. A chance neither of them should have had. The ditch was a coffin cut into earth, shallow and cruel. Rain drummed against the metal guardrail above, ran down in rivulets, and poured into the hollow where she lay. The mother dog did not flinch. Her body was too far gone for shivers. Every bone pressed against her skin, as if the skeleton were already trying to leave her flesh. Her ears twitched at the sound of her pups crying, but the response was faint, mechanical, more reflex than will. Their whimpers were piercing, small bodies wriggling blindly, pushing their damp noses against her chest, against her belly, searching. There was nothing left to give. She had not eaten in days, maybe weeks. Milk had dried into nothing, yet still their mouths latched, desperate, a rhythm against a silence that felt endless. Headlights washed over the ditch, sudden and alien. She lifted her eyes just slightly, pupils wide and unseeing, and the light carved her in half, one side fur-caked in mud, the other in a pale ghost glow. Tires screeched against wet gravel. Doors slammed, human voices cut through the storm. At first, distant, confused, questioning, hesitant. Then closer, urgent, alarmed. Boots splashed in mud, and the smell of gasoline mixed with rain and decay. A flashlight beam swept down, catching on her eyes. They looked like glass marbles, cloudy but still reflecting something back. A gasp, sharp and horrified, pierced the rain. Hands reached over the rail. She did not move. She did not resist. Fingers pressed into her side, cold against her heatless body, and she felt herself lifted, weightless, her paws dangling. Mud peeled from her fur like wet paper. The pups squealed, their tiny cries amplified as they were scooped up one by one, stuffed into the fold of a jacket, into the warmth of human skin. The mother sagged against the chest of her rescuer, too weak to understand. Her ears caught fragments of sound. "God, she's dying. Blanket quick, hurry." A car door opened. The smell of fabric seats, of old leather and damp wool. A blanket wrapped around her, tucking her body into a cocoon. She did not struggle. Her head fell against an arm, her breath shallow, chest rising with effort. A faint cry echoed from the jacket where her puppies were nestled, muffled but alive. She tried to raise her head to see them, but it dropped again. Her body was no longer hers. It was a vessel emptied, only tethered by the fragile thread of their voices. The engine roared. The vehicle lurched forward, tires cutting through flooded roads. Inside, the rescuer held her close, eyes darting between her ribs' fragile rise and fall. Their hands pressed against her chest, feeling the weak flutter of a heartbeat barely there. The pups shifted, their cries relentless. Rain hammered the windshield, wipers fighting to clear the blur, headlights slicing through sheets of water. Every second felt stolen, every mile a fight against time itself. The mother dog drifted in and out, the rhythm of the road lulling her toward the dark. But then, warmth, fingers stroking her head, a voice low and trembling, whispering promises she couldn't understand but felt in the vibration. Not commands, not threats, not the violence she had once known. A tone unfamiliar, fragile but fierce. Something in it tethered her a little longer, as if the sound alone were enough to keep her alive until the storm gave way. Fluorescent light cut like a blade when the car doors flew open. The rescuers rushed her inside, the mother draped across arms that trembled not from weight but from urgency. The air reeked of antiseptic and wet fur, and the sterile brightness stung against the shadows that had clung to her in the ditch. A table cleared with a sweep of a hand, metal clattering to the floor. She was laid down, her body folding unnaturally, her paws limp as though strings had been cut. The puppies came next, tiny wriggling bundles pressed against chests, wrapped in whatever fabric could be spared. They were set in a box lined hastily with towels, their cries filling the clinic like the echoes of survival itself. Their voices were fragile but constant, like sparks insisting against wind. Gloved hands pressed against her ribcage, searching for a rhythm. Another pair clipped IV lines, punctured skin with precision, fluid dripping into veins that had been dry too long. A warming lamp flooded her with amber light, casting her emaciated frame into cruel relief. Every rib showed, every hollow screamed of neglect. Someone muttered under their breath, barely a pulse, but no one stopped moving. The room was a storm of controlled chaos. Her eyes flickered open for moments at a time. Ceiling tiles above her blurred and dissolved into nothing. Once she turned her head weakly toward the sound of her pups, her gaze unfocused, yet something primal flickered there. A tether faint but unbroken. Her ears twitched at the sound of their cries, and for a heartbeat, she seemed to resist the drag of oblivion. Rescuers leaned close, murmuring soft encouragements, though they weren't sure if she could hear. Towels rubbed against her fur, drying the rain and mud, creating friction to coax warmth. A syringe pressed against the IV line, medication sliding into her bloodstream like a second chance delivered in liquid form. Her breathing stuttered, shallow, broken, then steadied. Not strong, not sure, but steady. The puppies were brought closer, set beneath the warmth of the same lamp. Their cries softened, replaced by weak suckling noises as a dropper was introduced to their tiny mouths. Each swallow was a victory counted in seconds. A rescuer's hands shook as they fed them, eyes wet not from the storm but from the weight of witnessing life claw its way back from the brink. The room grew quieter, less frantic. Machines beeped steadily. The smell of wet fur lingered, but the scent of blood and decay had lessened. One rescuer, still bent over the mother, brushed a hand over her ear, whispering, "You made it here. Hold on a little longer." Her chest rose again, shallow but rhythmical, her pupils adjusting to the light. For the first time, she blinked and held it, her gaze lingering on the shape of one rescuer's face. The room exhaled with her. Not safety, not yet, but a crossing between the world that had abandoned her and one that refused to let her go. The night gave way to a pale dawn that crept in through the frosted clinic windows, smearing the floor with a muted silver light. The storm had passed, leaving only the steady hum of machines and the muffled breaths of sleeping rescuers slumped in chairs. But on the table, beneath the amber glow of the warming lamp, the mother stirred. It was not much. Just the faintest twitch of her paw, a small lift of her head. But it was enough to send a ripple of movement through the room. Her eyes opened fully this time, no longer glazed. They darted first to the box where her puppies lay bundled together, their tiny sides rising and falling in synchronized rhythm. The sound of their breathing, faint, uneven, pulled her gaze, locked her to the world. She tried to rise, but her legs betrayed her, folding beneath her weight. The effort sent her chest heaving, yet she did not collapse into stillness as before. A rescuer, startled awake, rushed to steady her, whispering, "Easy, easy. You're safe now." Oars stretched. The clinic filled with small sounds, water dripping into IV lines, paper rustling as notes were scribbled, the tiny whimpers of pups being fed by hand. The mother's strength returned in fragments, like shards of glass being carefully pieced back together. A sip of water coaxed into her mouth, a lick of food pressed to her tongue. Each swallow felt monumental. When they brought one of the pups close, she lifted her head again, trembling but intent. Her nose brushed against the small body, her eyes softening with recognition. The puppy wriggled weakly, mouth opening in blind instinct. And then, slow, almost hesitant, she shifted, allowing the pup to press against her chest. The rescuers held their breath, unsure if she could nurse, unsure if her body had the strength to provide. But the puppy latched, and for the first time in days, life flowed in a cycle older than memory itself. The room seemed to warm with it. Rescuers exchanged glances, their exhaustion momentarily lifted. One of them leaned against the wall, whispering, "She's fighting. She's really fighting." Over the next days, her body mended like a landscape thawing after winter. Her fur, still ragged, dried and fluffed under careful hands. Her eyes, once glassy, began to hold the light, following movement, tracking her puppies with a mother's vigilance. She no longer lay collapsed in the corner of blankets. She shifted, adjusted, curled protectively around the box that had once been their lifeline. The puppies grew louder, their cries sharper, demanding more with every hour. They stumbled clumsily on unsteady legs, tumbling into each other, rolling toward the warmth of their mother's body. She licked their heads, her tongue moving with the patience of one who had nearly lost everything. The clinic was filled with a rhythm. Tiny squeaks, soft sighs, the rustle of fabric as rescuers leaned in to watch a miracle unfold, not in a single instant, but in the long, stubborn defiance of death day after day. And though the rain had stopped, the world outside smelled of damp earth and renewal. Inside, the mother dog's eyes glowed with a fragile fire, each blink a statement. We were not meant to survive, but we did. By the second week, the clinic smelled less of antiseptic and more of warm fur, of milk, of the faint hay, sweet musk of blankets washed and dried again and again. The mother had risen fully now, no longer collapsing beneath her weight. Her legs trembled at first, but she paced the length of her pen, circling her pups, nudging them with her nose whenever they strayed too far from the warmth. Her ribs were still sharp beneath her coat, but muscle had begun to return, a faint armor growing over the skeleton that once looked ready to break through her skin. The rescuers watched her with the reverence one reserves for miracles. They remembered the ditch, the rain, the way her body had been so still they weren't sure if she was alive when they first touched her. To see her standing now, head lifted, eyes bright, felt like watching the world being rewritten. She greeted them with cautious trust, her tail twitching, her ears softening, but her true focus remained on the small lives at her belly. The puppies had begun to grow restless with life. Their bellies, once shrunken, now rounded with nourishment. They wobbled on unsteady paws, their cries louder, sharper, demanding more from the world. They tumbled into each other, biting softly, squealing in mock battle, their energy filling the clinic with sound. At night, when the rescuers dimmed the lamps, the room pulsed with the quiet symphony of their breathing, a chorus that lulled even the exhausted humans to sleep. Then came the moment that seared itself into memory. A rescuer opened the pen one morning, sunlight slicing across the floor in golden bars. The mother, instead of shrinking back, stepped forward. She pressed her nose against the rescuer's hand, her eyes searching, as though measuring whether this was trust or surrender. And then she leaned, just slightly, her weight settling into the palm that had once lifted her from the mud. It was a gesture small enough to miss, yet monumental. A bridge between survival and belonging. Outside, autumn leaves scattered across the parking lot, the storm long forgotten. Inside, the puppies wrestled over a scrap of blanket, their yips sharp and joyous. The mother lay down near them, her body curved protectively, her eyes half closed but watchful. Every rise and fall of her chest carried the echo of that night in the ditch, the razor-thin line between death and life. And every time her puppies cried, she answered, not with silence, not with stillness, but with the steady presence of one who had been pulled back from the brink and had chosen to remain. Winter's edge arrived quietly, a brittle frost painting the windows of the clinic, yet inside the walls was a different season entirely. Life had swollen the small room until it overflowed with sound, puppies tumbling across the floor, paws tapping like rain against tile, sharp yips rising like laughter. Their coats had thickened, their bodies no longer fragile bones, wrapped in skin but sturdy, playful frames that carried them clumsily into every corner. The mother watched them from her place near the blankets, her body curved into a crescent of vigilance. Her ribs no longer showed as starkly. Her fur had taken on a sheen beneath the careful hands that brushed her daily. She bore scars still, lines along her skin, a shadow in her eyes that caught light at certain angles. But those marks seemed less like wounds and more like scripture. She had been written into survival, etched by suffering, carried now by the weight of what she had endured. The rescuers had stopped counting days. They marked time instead by victories. The first puppy who barked, a tiny sound that startled even himself. The first step the mother took outside, paws pressing into snow with no hesitation. The moment she raised her head at the sight of her rescuers and wagged her tail without fear. each act stacked upon the last, building not just survival, but triumph. The climax arrived one morning when the pen was opened, and instead of waiting, the mother stepped forward with her pups clustered at her heels. They poured into the hall like a river of life, tripping over each other, tumbling in joyous chaos. The rescuers laughed, some with tears catching in their throats, as the mother moved among them, not as the skeletal ghost from the ditch, not as the silent patient clinging to an IV, but as a guardian alive with strength. Her eyes held steady now, no longer clouded, but lit from within with something fierce. The room erupted in motion, pups darting after shoelaces, leaping clumsily into arms, squealing with delight, and in the center of it all the mother sat tall, her chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. She turned her head, met the gaze of the one who had lifted her from the mud weeks before. In that moment, no words could contain it, the arc from death to life, from ditch to dawn. Her eyes spoke what no language could. Gratitude laced with defiance. A testament that she had not only survived but returned to claim the life nearly stolen. The rescuers stood in silence, watching as sunlight spilled across fur and floor, as laughter and barking braided into a hymn of survival. The mother lowered her head, licked one of her pups as he pressed against her, and the circle closed, the once doomed family alive, whole together. Outside, the ditch remained where it always had, a scar in the earth. But it no longer held them. It had become only memory, a place swallowed by rain and forgotten by the world. Inside, beneath the warm hum of lamps and the steady hands of strangers who had become guardians, a miracle breathed. And it would keep breathing as long as they did. Snow fell soft outside, the kind that hushed the streets and turned every surface into something tender, as though the world itself had decided to move slowly, reverently. Inside, the clinic was quiet now. The chaos of rescue had dissolved into a rhythm of ordinary days, feeding, cleaning, gentle laughter that echoed between the walls. The miracle had settled into something steady, no longer fragile, but permanent. The mother lay stretched across a blanket by the heater, her body no longer a shadow of hunger but full, her chest rising with the calm of sleep unbroken by fear. Her puppies pressed against her belly, not out of desperation anymore but habit, their small paws twitching as they dreamed. Their breaths were soft, synchronized, a chorus of life that once almost never was. One of the rescuers sat nearby, chin in their hand, watching without words. It wasn't the noise of the puppies, or even the sight of them tumbling through play that struck deepest. It was this stillness. The mother's head resting on her paws, her eyes half open, unafraid. The way she leaned into the weight of their small bodies without flinching. The storm that once drowned her had been replaced by a silence thick with trust. Every detail of that night lingered in memory. The ditch, the headlights, the limp weight of her body in desperate arms. Yet here, in the soft glow of the heater, with snow falling beyond the glass, it seemed impossible that the same world could hold both ruin and redemption so closely together. The ditch had been a grave. Now, this was rebirth. Morning light bled through the window, spilling golden across her fur. One by one, the puppies stirred, yawning, stretching, noses nudging into her warmth. She licked each of them in turn, slow, deliberate, as though counting them, as though reminding herself they were real. When she lifted her head, her eyes caught the light, and something eternal settled there. Not just survival, but belonging. The rescuer rose quietly, unwilling to break the spell, and stepped back. The scene would remain etched in their mind long after. The sight of a family once pulled from the edge of death, now bathed in peace, breathing freely, alive because chance had collided with mercy. Outside, the snow kept falling. The ditch lay empty, filling slowly with water and silence, a scar in the earth hidden beneath the weight of winter. But here, in this room, warmth pushed back against every shadow. A miracle had not only arrived in time, it had chosen to stay. The weeks unfurled into months, and the memory of the ditch began to fade, not erased, never forgotten, but softened by the weight of new days. The puppies grew into themselves, their once frail legs carrying them steady and sure, their eyes sharp with curiosity instead of clouded by hunger. They learned to chase the sunlight across the clinic floor, to leap over one another in clumsy arcs, to collapse in a heap of tangled fur and sighs. Each breath they drew was defiance against the silence that had nearly claimed them. The mother dog changed more slowly, but perhaps more profoundly. She carried her scars not as wounds, as quiet emblems of what she had endured. Where she had once shayed from touch, now she leaned into it, tentatively at first, then fully, allowing a hand to rest against her head, a voice to soften her gaze. The storm had stripped her of everything but instinct. The months that followed gave her back something rarer: trust. Adopters began to arrive, strangers with warm eyes and outstretched hands. One by one, the puppies found homes. The goodbyes were gentle but bittersweet, each departure a tearing and a mending all at once. The mother watched them go without panic, her eyes following until the doors closed, then turning back to the blanket where she had once lain broken. She no longer feared loss, because she had survived the deepest kind already. When her turn came, it was quiet, almost ordinary. A family knelt before her, their hands open, their movements unhurried. She pressed her nose into the palm of a child, and something in her body eased. Not surrender, recognition. She walked forward, and did not look back when the door closed. The rescuers remained in the clinic, the silence of her absence heavy but not empty. They carried the memory of her in fragments. The way her ribs had shone beneath the stormlight, the sound of her pup's cries swallowed by rain, the moment her eyes cleared under the heat of the lamp. And later, the way she had walked out on her own, strong, whole, no longer a shadow pulled from the mud, but a mother who had carried her children into life. Outside, the ditch remained, a scar in the earth where rain still pooled after storms. But it no longer felt like a grave. It had become a reminder that life can hang by a thread, that mercy can arrive in headlights and hurried hands, that survival is never neat but always possible. And somewhere beyond that clinic, in a house filled with warmth, the mother lay curled on a soft rug while snow fell outside. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of peace. Her eyes, once glassy and resigned, now reflected firelight. The miracle had not been the rescue alone. The miracle was this, that she had been given the chance not just to survive, but to live. Spring arrived with the smell of thawing earth, damp grass pressing its scent into every breeze. In the small house where she now lived, the mother dog carried herself differently, her gait steady, her ears lifted to the sound of birdsong instead of rain. The rug by the fireplace was hers, but she wandered through rooms as though she had always belonged there, her paws soft against wood, her presence quiet but undeniable. Her puppies, scattered now into new homes, carried her survival in their bones. Letters arrived at the clinic where she had once fought for breath. Photographs tucked into envelopes. A puppy sprawled in a backyard, fur golden beneath the sun. Another curled in the lap of an elderly woman, eyes closed in sleep. One perched on a couch beside children, their laughter frozen in a captured frame. Each image was a chapter in the miracle's aftermath, proof that the ditch had not written their ending. The rescuers pinned the photos to a corkboard in the clinic hallway. Each picture was a small defiance, a testament that the night of rain and headlights had rippled far beyond itself. And when they paused at the board, they always thought of her, the mother who had lain silent and skeletal, yet found the strength to rise, to feed her pups, to trust again. In her new home, she carried no fear of ditches or storms. She carried only the memory of voices that had lifted her, hands that had warmed her, the sound of her puppies nursing beneath a heat lamp while she drifted between life and death. At night, when the fire snapped and shadows moved across the walls, she would lift her head, ears twitching, eyes reflecting the flame. And then she would sigh, a sound deep and whole, before sinking back into sleep. The ditch still exists somewhere, a hollow in the earth where water gathers after rain. But its story has been rewritten. It is no longer only a place of near death, but the ground where a miracle began. And so the arc closes, not with silence, but with the steady breath of a dog who should have been gone, who now dreams in warmth while the world spins on, unaware that beneath one patch of winter sky, life once chose to stay when everything said it could not. Summer burned the edges of the fields, cicadas buzzing in the heat, the air thick with pollen and the sweetness of cut grass. In the house where the mother now lived, windows stood open to let in the breeze, curtains swelling and falling like sails. She lay by the doorway, half in shadow, half in light, her body stretched long and lean, no trace left of the trembling skeleton once pulled from mud. Her family moved around her, their rhythms weaving into hers. Footsteps on the stairs, laughter spilling from the kitchen, the scrape of a chair pulled across the floor. She lifted her head at these sounds not with fear, but with belonging. Sometimes she followed the child who had first held out a palm to her, trailing quietly across the yard. Sometimes she sat by the garden, nose tilted to the wind, as though measuring the distance between what she had survived and where she stood now. The clinic still spoke of her, even months later. New rescues came in, broken in different ways, and her story became the whispered reminder that even on the edge of death, with rain drowning the earth and silence settling in bones, life could claw back. Her photographs hung by the corkboard now, added among the others, her image no longer one of ribs and mud, but of soft eyes and healed fur. The rescuers touched the photo when days grew heavy, reminding themselves that the work was never in vain. Her puppies had grown into dogs scattered across towns and farms, each carrying her defiance in the tilt of their heads, the strength of their steps. Letters still arrived, scrawled notes about first swims, first runs in fields, first nights curled at the foot of a bed. The rescuers pinned those too, and the wall became not just a record but a hymn. And still, when the world grew quiet, when the house sank into sleep, the hum of the day gone, the mother would rest her head on her paws and dream. In those dreams, rain sometimes fell, headlights sometimes cut through darkness. She would feel the weight of mud again, the frailty of her body, the pull of her pup's cries. But she always woke to warmth, to hands on her fur, to the steady rhythm of safety. The ditch, somewhere beyond sight, filled again and again with rain. But it no longer belonged to death alone. It belonged also to the moment when fate was interrupted, when headlights broke the dark, when hands lifted what should have been lost. And in the long seasons that followed, that moment stretched outward like rings in water, carrying her and her children into lives whole and ordinary and alive. Autumn returned, the air sharp with wood smoke, leaves lifting from the trees in copper spirals. The world had shifted again, but the rhythm of her life remained steady, almost sacred. The mother, once a shadow pressed into mud, now padded across polished floors, as though she had always known the sound of safety beneath her paws. Her coat gleamed when the sun touched it, her body no longer fragile but full, carrying the strength of months well fed, well loved. She lay often near the child who read by the window, her head resting on small legs, her ears flicking at the sound of turning pages. Sometimes she rose and moved to the hearth, curling into herself by the fire, the flames painting her fur gold. In those moments, her breathing was slow, deep, the kind of breath that belongs only to creatures who no longer fear that sleep might be their last. At the clinic, her name had become shorthand for hope. Remember the ditch, rescuers would say when another broken animal arrived, trembling and near gone. They remembered the night, the headlights slicing through rain, the skeletal frame that felt too cold to be alive. They remembered how she had risen, how she had nursed again, how she had walked out the door into a future no one thought she'd reach. Her story was told again and again, not polished, not softened, but raw, because its rawness was its power. Her puppies, scattered now into the arms of different families, lived their own small epilogues. A farmer wrote of one racing across fields at dawn, her silhouette sharp against the mist. An old woman described a pup curled against her hip through long nights, keeping her heart steady. Photographs pinned to corkboard bore witness paws in snow, faces lifted into sunlight, the exuberant blur of lives fully claimed. Each image sang the same refrain. Life had been stolen from the ditch and scattered wide, blooming where it never should have. And she, the mother, carried it all in her eyes. When she lifted her head at dusk, gazing through the open door toward the horizon, something passed through her look. An echo of rain, of headlights, of mud pressing heavy against her skin. But it dissolved quickly into calm. She turned back to her family, to the fire, to the rug where she would rest her head among the crackle of warmth. The ditch had not vanished. It still lay carved in earth somewhere, filling with water after storms, holding silence where cries had once been. But in the lives it had nearly consumed, It had left a legacy it could never claim, a miracle stretched into seasons, into photographs, into laughter and breath. And so the story closes not in darkness, but in the steady rhythm of survival turned to peace. A mother, once written off to die, now dreams in the glow of firelight, her chest rising, falling, a quiet testament that sometimes the world gives back what it almost took away. The ditch is still there, somewhere beyond the edges of memory, a shallow cut in the land where rain gathers after storms. Grass has grown over its sides, softening its shape, but the earth remembers. For those who found her that night, it will never be just another hollow in the soil. It will remain the place where life hung by a thread, where headlights cut through darkness, where chance met mercy and shifted the weight of the world for one mother and her fragile brood. Yet the ditch is no longer her story. Her story lives in the glow of firelight that paints her fur each evening in her new home, in the quiet breath she releases as she curls against the rug, in the gentle rhythm of a child's hand resting on her head. What was once ribs and bone and silence has become warmth and belonging. She no longer trembles at the sound of rain. She listens instead to the patter against windows, safe within walls that keep the storm at bay. Her puppies carry the story outward like seeds on the wind. They bound through fields, curl into laps, sleep at the feet of those who call them family. Each one is a living fragment of that night, proof that what should have ended in mud became a beginning instead. Letters arrive with photographs. Tongues lolling in summer heat, paws lifted against falling snow, eyes bright with trust. The rescuers pin them to the clinic wall. Each image a hymn to resilience, each smile a reminder that the work of saving is never wasted. For those who lifted her from the ditch, memory is a double-edged thing. They remember the weight of her body, nearly lifeless in their arms. They remember the raw urgency in their voices, the sharp scent of mud and fear. But they remember, too, the moment her eyes cleared under the lamp, the way her chest rose with steadier breath, the first time she leaned her body against their hand. They carry both truths, that she was almost lost and that she was saved. And in that duality lies the miracle itself. Seasons will turn again. Snow will come and melt, leaves will fall and scatter. Storms will rage and fade. The ditch will fill and empty unnoticed by most. But she will continue, walking in fields, dozing in sunlight, lifting her head when her name is called in a voice that belongs to her forever family. Her story is not the ditch, it is the distance between then and now, between almost and alive. And in the end, it settles into one image, a mother once skeletal, now whole, her chest rising in quiet sleep while the world moves gently around her. The grave that waited in the earth became instead a cradle, and from it she carried her children and herself into life.